We are completely over-engineering this shock mount and finally installing it on the bike, as well as making some more progress on the rear subframe. All this and more, so let's go. It's time to start making the actual adapter that's going to allow the R1 shock to be mounted on such an old bike. The old shock is much longer than the newer modern R1 shock, so I need a spacer adapter that is going to lengthen it. I originally 3D modeled this because I was going to 3D print it and make sure everything was going to fit before I started fabricating, but I didn't do that even though I made the model, so here's what I actually did. Look at how simple the one on the left is. That is from 2 Car Garage. He has a YouTube channel, check it out, but we're doing the same thing. Here's my design on the right, and as you can see, it is much more complicated with a ton more pieces. The simplest designs are always the best designs, and if you follow the KISS principle of keep it simple, stupid, you're gonna go far in life, but I don't follow that principle. I go with the overcomplicate everything until you hate yourself more than you did before you started the project. That's usually how I do things, and it at least makes stuff more interesting. As you can see, there are quite a lot of pieces to this part, and I'm just checking to make sure that all the tolerances are how I thought they would be, which everything is fitting up nicely so far, so that's really good. I got all these pieces from Send Cut Send. I am not sponsored in any way, but I do like their service. All these things were 40 bucks and it only took them about a week to get them to me, and considering how much metal costs these days, I don't think I would have saved all that much if I cut all these pieces out on my own from one flat sheet. Yeah, I would have saved a little bit, but when you think about how much time would have been invested, and it would not look this nice whatsoever. One thing is for certain, that this part is going to be way overkill. It definitely doesn't need to be this strong. This is a little under 1/4 inch thick steel. This is like 4.78 millimeters thick. The cuts were so precise I didn't need to do really any deburring, but I am making the surface finish a little bit better for welding. Even though I probably could have gotten away with not doing this, it took a very long time because there's a lot of pieces. There's 4 edges for each piece or more, and then I needed to do both sides of them because I'm going to try to weld the inside as well as the outside. Hindsight 2020, I probably should have just taken the lazy way, which was just tacking and welding all the outside seams, and that would have been more than adequate for what I'm using this for, but I wanted a bit more of a challenge. I'm pretty new to welding, so the more welding I do, the better it's going to be for me, so I also wanted to try to weld all the inside seams. This can be quite a challenge if you're trying to make a box. How do you weld the inside of the box before you make it? You can't really do that, so I'm trying to assemble it in a way where it's going to give me access up to the last point. So here I am making basically just the sides of the box so I can get to the inside seams of those pieces. This is only my second welding project, so I haven't had a ton of experience with different materials and thicknesses. This is by far the thickest welds I've been trying to make, and I definitely could have helped with turning up my machine quite a bit more. I'm used to welding much thinner things, or at least on the last project, the tubing was only about 2 millimeters thick. This is double that thickness, and I'm doing a bunch of different kinds of welds, so if you're looking and going, wow, those welds look way too cold, that's because they are. Although I did go over these seams with multiple passes, so even though they look very cold, and as you can see, the metal there is shifting a bit, which that's what happens when you're welding things. The metal tends to get really hot and then it starts moving. So if you have a perfectly fitting box, there's a good chance it's probably not going to fit perfectly after that. Which again is 2020 hindsight, where I should have just tacked everything and welded it all from the outside, because as the pieces wanted to shift, then they would have been held by the other colder pieces, so that would have worked out a lot better. But no, I wanted the challenge of trying to weld all the inside seams, and that made things more difficult. At least I could still get this bolt in and out, because with things shifting, I could see that being a problem. There's no foreshadowing right there. Some of these welds are coming out better, and I just got more and more experience with all these welding projects I've been doing. I'm basically working on the rear subframe and the rear shock mount at the same time, so you're going to see me flipping back and forth, which is good for welding because it allows one part to cool while you work on the other one, and then you can swap them out. It just makes things a little bit easier to work on. This project has posed so many more welding challenges than my last project, which is really good because it's forcing me to kind of level up my skills, and I can really feel a difference between when I first started this project to where I am now, and I am nowhere near the end of this. This is only like a third of the way through the fabrication so far, but it just goes to show that experience is definitely the best teacher. So if you want to do something, just start doing it. Go out and do it. Go get the things you need to do to start doing it, but if you do it, you will get better at it. That's just how it works. Although I do have a pretty good idea in my head of how I want this rear subframe to look, I'm still making little tweaks and changes as I go, which is why it's taking me so long, because I have to look at it, do a little more, look at it some more, and I just want to catch all the things I don't like before I end up making something and then having to backtrack a whole ton. This clamp is actually helping me visualize how long I want the seat as well as the rear kick-up angle, because without seeing it, I don't know where I need to cut it, and I only want to make this cut once. I don't really want to cut it too long and then have to cut it again later, and I also don't want to make it too short and have to weld on another piece because that's not going to look as nice. The first side of this always takes so much longer because once you know exactly how it's going to look, you can quickly make a mirror image of that. So that's what I'm doing here. Now that I pretty much have at least one side of this piece all made up, I can just duplicate it easily because I already know how long everything needs to be. I can use the other part as a reference. It just always goes so much faster on the second piece. Those 3 angled pieces right there originally took me about 3 or 4 hours to get everything exactly how I wanted it, but once I had that, to make a duplicate of that, it only took me about 20 minutes. All of my angles and all the lengths had already been mapped out in the previous version, so this was so much easier to make after. I just had to line everything up and then just recut it. After making that other side, we're starting to get something that actually looks like you could sit on it, or at least partially so far, and I'm really happy about that. The next thing I need to do is start making some holes. I do need to duplicate this one in the same spot. I definitely don't want this hole to be higher or lower than the other one, which seems very simple, but it's actually kind of tricky. But I did get it and everything's looking pretty good. Yeah, so I didn't document that other hole being made, but I think I did the first one and it's just a duplication of that. And I try my best not to show you guys the same redundant things over and over, although honestly this channel is basically cutting, welding, drilling, screwing things together, and that's every single video pretty much. Here's what you'll mostly find me doing on this project at this time, which is changing and adjusting things little by little, trying to get as much symmetry as I possibly can while still having a human element to it, because of course I can't get it perfect, but I am going to try my best to make it look that way. Okay, so it seems like I made a bit of a tolerance error in my original design with this shock mount, because part of the shock actually comes out and protrudes on one of the sides, and I needed to make a little bit more clearance for that. It wasn't like a complete design oversight. I knew that protrusion was there. It just, the tolerances were quite a bit too tight. It probably would have fit anyway, but I wanted to make a little bit more room for it. Here you can see all my terrible welding trying to get to the insides. Look at all that orange oxidation. I was having quite a bit of trouble with that. I'll get into that a little bit later. On the left side of that bottom piece, that actually looks like a pretty good weld, but some of these are not good. You can go ahead and judge me all you want. I don't care, because I'm just learning, and a lot of these are cold, too cold. Some of them are okay, but I just needed a lot more practice, and here's how this piece fits together, and I did a bit of tweaking. It does fit together, although very tightly at this point. The tolerances are close enough to where if I give it some taps with a hammer, it definitely fuses completely, but now the bolt is very tight. It does go in and out, but it needs some persuasion. I don't really care if the entire box fits tightly together, because I'm just going to be fully welding this out, and honestly I don't even really need to remove the bolt. I could have just welded in a sleeve, because if I ever want to take the shock out, I can just remove the whole assembly, but this is how I made it, so we're going with it. Let me just show you some of the troubles I was having when fully welding this out. As you can see, there is a ton of sparks coming out of my welds, and that's not supposed to look like that. What's very strange is that this was only happening on one side of the box. As you can see, I will switch to the other side and the weld goes so much better, and there's not a ton of sparks, so I couldn't tell you why one side was working fine and the other wasn't. It still was getting a few sparks, but not nearly as much as the other side. This was baffling to me. So when you get a bunch of sparks, this is oxidation, and that means that the air is getting in touch with your weld. It's supposed to be shielded with argon gas, but this is what happens. That's where you get all this orange stuff. That's all the oxidation, which I don't understand why it was only happening really on one side and not the other. Everything points to a gas issue. I talked to my buddy about it, who is way better at welding, and he was like, yeah, check your gas settings, which I thought I had done a bunch of times with experimenting with less and more gas, but as it turns out, I was about 12 CFM, right on the cusp of being not enough, or perfect amount. So yeah, I just had to turn up my gas, and then everything was going so much better in the next welding session. So if you're having issues like this, check your gas flow, make sure you don't have any leaks or anything like that, because it 99% of the time is a gas issue. I'm glad I ran into this problem though, because when I see that in the future, I'll know exactly what to check and how to fix it. So yeah, running into issues and problems and getting frustrated, that's just part of the learning process. So if you're having problems, it's fine. It just means you're going to learn something. After a lot of time welding, I finally got this all welded out, and yeah, it doesn't look pretty, and I'm not going to be winning any awards for my fabrication, but it definitely is not going to come apart, which was the whole point of making it. I could have made this part look really cool, but you're not really going to see it, and also I don't have the skills for that yet, but I think over time I will at least be able to make my welds look better, and I am excited about that progress. So here's the full completed unit. We can finally install it into the bike and have it sit on its brand new shock. With the shock mounted up, I have a ton more progress to show you guys, so please stay tuned, and I will see you in the next one.